lecture 49.5. I'll try not to get throttled within this as I have by decreasing the screen size, maybe involving other things. Perfect storm, post-peak oil, the inclusion of AI into our semio-capitalist manipulation using Berardi's term, Bunkyul-Han, the idea that symbolic exchange has entered into a hyper field of individually tailored websites, social media incitements. There is a ghost in the machine. That's the presupposition. Um, and now we're talking about the other perfect storm of bioengineering at a cut rate in the form of CRISPR enhancement, total enhancement, beyond cosmetic, um, germline, meaning within the cell itself, not just wiping or creating scaffolding upon the already living body, but to extend all features after the DNA was sequenced, and we have categories of choice around a bifurcation of history and evolution, moral discussion, perfect monsters. In this, we see perhaps a romantic, I mentioned this before in previous classes, a romantic tendency to say that the individual identity is fluid, is permeable, is chameleon-like, does have a Hegelian history of abuse as victimology, leads to notions of so-called, pejoratively put, snowflake modernity, everyone is special. This bifurcation of history is dead serious. In another lecture, we'll talk about um, Homo ludens, Homo faber. We talked about authenticity in that kind of mid 19th century through mid 20th century reaction to the quantification and mass destruction of human beings in the form of industrial era wars, industrial production, rampant unregulated financial markets, Great Depressions, Cold Wars, nuclear annihilation. What is our choice of authenticity within this going on? Which scenario? We're going to get to another article, which we are here, 2000. No, this is beyond 2000, by a group of Vancouver-based architects talking about post-peace oil and Olduvai hypothesis of peak technology use is used up. Established population without die-off, with human die-off, food declines, pollution declines too, yay, with the decline of this singular factor for efficiency and the creation of alpha cities post-peak oil. We saw during COVID kind of a reprieve, fewer carbon footprints by people remaining online, hearkening to that fantastic short story by E.M. Forster, The Machine Stops. Those who are adventurous to travel take slow-moving zeppelins, sound familiar, to meet their mothers. Otherwise, everyone's online in their little Zoom conferences and making their own personal little TED Talks, which they live and die for. Longtail, black swan, tipping point. We know these things are going to happen. The black swan, we've covered this in the past. We have ethical theories to apply this to other than raw, brute nihilism. Utilitarian, deontology, this upper right, duty-based, which is contractual, and rights-based, which is also contractual, normative. Normative lower left. Will these be enough to find an orderly soft landing, as the architects say, out of the crisis of Malthusian overpopulation, dependency on oil, oncoming emergence of both AI, pervasive AI in the Internet of Things, and CRISPR biological engineering? Who has the keys to the kingdom? this is a great little thing about higher education: consumerism, course relations with other course, student-class relationship, submit outputs better than others, buy items, get highest grade in class, submit required outputs, like teacher that gives high grade. These are these cancerous feedback loops. These are alternatives to learning preferred, giving less for more. Not unusual, but in terms of innovation, Socratic methods, problem solving, ways out, this is reducing education to mere consumerism, which I contend much of this STEM fetish is. What's the alternative to STEM fetish is a critical view of technocracy as a means in itself. I've been reading interesting book, The City of Tomorrow: Sensors, Network, Hackers, and the Future Urban Life by these two gentlemen. Basically a technophilic book by Carlo Ratti and Matthew Claudel, but they get into talking about avoid the issue of authenticity. What makes a human being? Smart cities make a human being seems to be their technocratic, technophilic approach, but they're starting to get into homo ludens, the human who plays, treating even the so-called perfect storm apocalypse as with a sense of play, discovery. Technology life exceeds quality. Most consumers not interested. Space of flows, sweet spot. It's always hope. What we blast people off. Send. I guess there were 50,000 volunteers to take a one-way ticket to Mars already. This is spurious since no spacecraft can guard against radiation. So therefore, it is unknown whether the human being as evolved can actually handle space travel. Our favorite semiotic square. Mobile media converging with AI. Tool is foreground. We get our marching orders from it. Logical surveillance. Space surveillance is MIT professor, I forget his name now, coined the word surveillance or willing surveillance. Read Instagram, read Facebook, read all other social media platforms. With the mobility, as we mentioned, the cell phone is the Protestant church clock tower in the Hanseatic cities, summoning you to work. There's an ambiguity, unsearchable debate, memory, prosthetic, empathy. CRISPR, what does it do? It is an interior tool designed for superiority or perceived superiority. This is where the nominalism of STEM will lead necessarily to redesign the human being itself. To develop new foods, to use technology as a stopgap against stewardship and against permaculture, that we simply apply more technology, the nominalism, positivism of STEM-based education as a thing in itself without considering human lives as things in themselves. Interior tools designing superiority. There will be big issues with utilitarian ethics, racism, sexism, classism for sure, in the human centrist perspective, and so forth. This is Viviane Mayer, a French nurse to many people. Phil Donahue is one of them. But during her job as a nurse to children, she took her camera and has developed a posthumous following, kind of the dual schizophrenia as Deleuze and Guattari talked about, the schizophrenia of being both homo ludens and homo faber, We see that in this gig economy, a reapproachment to that notion. Contrast Vivian Maier and her copious amounts of photographs, a lot which were found in a container, bid on for $300. The young gentleman who did that is now very wealthy, and her photographs are still being reprocessed. Many shows all over the world, from an obscure nurse in America, Chicago, much like Kafka, posthumous fame. Consider that with, I forget which Kardashian this is, the notion of surveillance, sousveillance. Steve Mann is the MIT professor's name. That there is a willing surveillance, that this Deleuzian schizophrenia is increased to an exponential level where every second of our day is changed. There can be no germline editing of a Kardashian. They're already born, maybe future Kardashians. But they do set a standard in terms of exhibitionism, what the popular standard for exhibition means. What's public, what's blind, what's private, what's unknown, the Johari, what do we know of the self, of engineering, how much AI is out there, how much there's a kind of a sinister ghost in the machine of these AI, how many people can the planet take before utter collapse. We live in interesting times, for sure. These are the spin-offs and what AI will do in contrast to biology. How computational biology, computer science, artificial intelligence, economics, law, media, what I do, all happen in the socio-cultural Venn diagram. Now, the direct feedback, we covered this in earlier talks, but this is kind of the end of the class, saying how we, during COVID, in our so-called alpha cities, as this group points out, how are we actually controlled? This is kind of a Lacanian notion of the self. The cell phone is the mirror reflecting back our alienated self. We see lower left a young lady with a super thin waist, on the border of eating disorder. We see a Kardashian, I forget which, and we see Vivian Maier in the lower right. The nebulous other, the person we should be empathizing with, is on the cloud-like region. The hashtag is the feedback gaze. What are others thinking about us, on top of what we're actually reflecting ourselves to ourselves. Technologies will increase, but technologies to solve questions of stewardship, questions of permaculture, will not be solutions in themselves, as we saw from Heidegger. This is a world filled with augmented reality, a crazy world. I forget, it's by Goldsmith's professor, who set up this world of continuous augmented reality layered onto reality. In the Borges short story, the court cartographer has made the map as big as the territory. Film theory, and we're back to the Lacanian mirror stage applied to the iPhone. Anything pertinent? We have the gaze, the look, the ego, the eternal self, who is alienated in the city because they have debt, they need to work. Life is not up to the ideal, they feel lack, and they mirror themselves in the cell phone. The imago on the outside is the misrecognized ideal, the ideal intimate, the ideal lover, the ideal friend, the ideal family, the ideal selfie, the ideal food selfie, the ideal sunset exists beyond there. strangely within the intimate range of the pocket smartphone. This is what I do just to explore it, to humanize it, to check the nested realities and the filmic regions and so forth.